Hi, this is Lamar, and you're listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. A third space is a term that refers to a safe space for people to come together for respectful dialogue in a spirit of listening, sharing, and learning. In this podcast, we explore what it means to have third space conversations, and we try to model them. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share it, and of course, like it. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Now let's get to third space today.
Hey Lamar, how's it going this week?
Tom, it is just going unbelievably well. How's that?
Oh my gosh. Does that have anything to do with our guest today?
It might have. It might have. I'm looking forward to a conversation today with Stephen Owens.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fun.
Have you got him trapped in the green room already?
He's in the green room. I'm
Yes.
hoping he's digging through the basket that I had sent for him there and hanging out on the couch.
Yeah. Well, what'd you put in the basket this time?
Persimmons. I thought that was a pretty good idea. Pretty safe bet.
Okay.
Persimmons and gosh, what was the other thing I stuck in?
You said you were thinking about putting avocados in. Did you put
Avocados. That's right. Avocados and persimmons.
Okay.
I tried to get some sunflowers from Kansas, but it's not that time of the year. And so, they're all kind of wilted over right now.
Yep. All right.
So
we'll see. We'll see how he likes those. Well, let's
All
go
right.
ahead and bring him in out of the
right.
green room, and we'll get going here.
all right.
Hey, welcome, Stephen. How was the green
Stephen.
room today?
Well, man, the avocados were fantastic, but the persimmons stunk just a little bit.
Oh, you got the gift basket.
I did get the gift basket, and I appreciate that. Maybe the avocados came from Mexico, but the persimmons, they must have come from
No.
further away.
I think so, but sorry about that. I tried to have them add a little bit of Kansas too. I was hoping the sunflower stuff would be in there as well, but maybe it didn't make it. That's quite a trick.
I didn't see it this time. Man, I'm not
Okay.
sure. I'm not sure. Maybe it was just a fun joke you guys were playing on me or something. But I enjoyed the green room, though. Very comfortable, quite quiet. Although I did overhear you guys talking about me just a little bit.
Oh,
So, I look forward to this conversation.
Oh no, we weren't talking about you. No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Fair
No.
enough.
We probably should. Was the couch okay?
Couch was perfectly fine. Yeah,
Great,
absolutely. Yeah.
great. Well, we wouldn't recommend the recliner, but the couch works pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the recliner, the dog hair was a bit excessive
Yep.
there. I wasn't quite going there, but the couch was incredibly comfortable.
I
that's good.
think that was Lamar's dog because ours doesn't shed.
That was Jake, I guarantee you.
that was
But
Jake.
hey,
Okay.
he's a nice dog, and I just can't. I don't have the heart to kick him off the chair.
He
We're good to go.
deserves a recliner too. There's nothing wrong with it.
All
Well,
right,
Stephen,
welcome, Stephen.
It is
Yes,
really
thank
great
you.
to have you back. And we'll just remind folks that you were actually our very first guest on Getting to Third Space back in season 1. Wow.
Excellent. I didn't realize that I was your first guest, but now
yeah.
I feel kind of honored.
We only had one guest in the first season because we didn't think we were going to go through more than one season.
And you keep having me back, so I don't know.
Well, every 2 years, we don't want
Yeah.
to. But
Fair enough.
we're really delighted to have you back, and it's also important for folks to know that not only is this your second appearance, but in that time, some things have changed for you. At that time, you were a representative to the Kansas legislature, and today you are Senator Stephen Owens, representing the 31st Senate District. So
Yep.
Congratulations on that move.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed the transition, although it's a bit challenging, right? You're going from one of 125 to one of 100 or one of 40 comes with a little bit of extra responsibility, but I love that I get to do it and love that I get to have a seat at the table for the people of Kansas.
Excellent.
I think it's really important to know that moving from a representative role to a Senate role just compounds the time in it that you have to put into those roles. And I've heard you talk about that. In fact, last night, Tom, I had the privilege of listening to Stephen share more about some upcoming things here in the state. So I know he's out and about quite a bit.
Excellent.
Yeah, we had a great presentation last night over in Kansas. In August, we will be voting to change our Constitution back to the way it was in 1958 that allowed direct elections of Supreme Court justices, joining 22 other states that currently do it that way. We have a very unique model. It's a version of what they call the Missouri model, but we're the only one in the nation that allows a body of 9, 5 of which are elected or 5 of which are attorneys, 4 of which are appointed from the governor, to be the ones to ultimately pick 3 candidates that are sent to the governor, and the governor has to pick one of those candidates to put on the Supreme Court, and that's the process. And in many instances, that has created some challenges, we'll just say, and I think it really makes sense for us to get back to that. But that's, of course, not what we're talking about, although, Lamar, I really look forward to getting your take on that and your thoughts on that conversation.
Yeah, I'm anxious to sit down and have that conversation.
Great.
Well, and as I'm sure you found out, Stephen, Lamar has opinions.
He does, and while you've only had me on your podcast a couple of times here, he and I have met for coffee
I know
plenty more times, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I really do. It's great to hear from Lamar and spend time understanding things from just a different perspective. I welcome it every time.
Yeah. Well, that is really great. And also, we should say thank you to you because you introduced us to Ethan Corson.
Yes, absolutely, sure did. And he really told me how much he enjoyed being on your podcast.
Why anybody enjoys being on our podcast, we have no idea, but we're grateful that they do. All right.
Yeah.
So,
No, we had a good time with Ethan.
Yeah.
Well, good. And you probably know that Ethan is running for governor.
Right.
Yes.
And and appears that thus far, based on the comments from the Laura Kelly administration, that he has her support. While not an official endorsement, if you read the articles, she's very supportive. So I do really like Ethan in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so Lamar.
Yes, sir.
Why don't we forgot in our setup here to warn Stephen about one thing. And that at some point in the program, we're going to come back to you, Stephen, and we're going to ask you they're about an act of kindness.
Oh, great. I love it.
An act of kindness that you've received that has changed your life, and an act of kindness, if you can think of both, that would be great. An act of kindness that you've done towards someone else that you hope has made a difference. So that's a new thing we've been doing just the last few months of the program. So, so wanted you to be prepared and warned ahead of that. And we forgot to warn you ahead. So we'll give you a little bit of warning anyway. But
thank you.
Lamar, why don't you get us into the topic today?
Sure. Today we are going to do a table talk. And a table talk, to remind our listeners, is an opportunity for us to demonstrate conversations in a third space. The idea that we can talk about what we believe, what we think, ask questions of each other in a respectful manner, being curious about each other's position, and trying to not necessarily come at trying to change people's opinions or minds, but come at trying to understand each other. And that's what this is about. And when we're done, we want to take that opportunity to talk a little bit about how we think we did. Just kind of our own self-review, okay? Today, our topic is about private school funding, and should private schools be the recipients and the beneficiaries of state and federal funds, whether it's through a voucher system, a tax system of some sort. And I know there's a lot of different models out there. I will say, and Stephen, I know you can probably speak to this better than I can, but I'm in Kansas, and I know Kansas does have some tax advantages for people donating to private schools. And Tom, I believe you're in Maryland, and I think the state of Maryland has some advantages as well.
It's called the
Go ahead.
Boost program here in Maryland, and I think it's called the Sunflower Education Equity Act there in Kansas. But yes, we also have a school voucher program here in Maryland as well.
Yeah, and the one in Kansas currently exists is limited in scope primarily to those that are on the lower income scale,
Mm-hmm.
are the ones that can kind of access some of those benefits. So I really look forward to having the conversation and kind of hearing your guys' perspective on this topic.
Yeah. Well, I think, for full transparency, the three of us, and I did a little bit of conversation ahead of this podcast, but the three of us went to public school growing up. Tom and I in Iowa, and Steve and you in Oklahoma. But all three of us went to private colleges that were faith-based related at some levels.
That's correct.
So we kind of had this experience that's very similar. And I will say, I'm going to start out kind of from my experience. I feel like I had a very solid public education in elementary school and high school. Very, very solid. It was before there was a Department of Education. And so the states pretty much owned just about every piece of that process. I also feel that my education at a college that was, a faith-based 4-year liberal arts college in Indiana was also very solid, but definitely a faith-based approach to education. So that's kind of my position, and maybe a little bit of your all experiences before we actually jump in on the topic.
Lamar, I forgot, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. We didn't have a federal Department of Education until 1978.
Right.
And so, both of us, and, Steve's a young guy. Yeah. Steven's a very young man.
The 70s were good for me. It happened to be around the time I was born. It's good.
Well, it was, I graduated early in the 70s, and it was still very much a state-run process. And I would say too, I had a very good education, even though it was an extremely small school. There were 24 in my graduating class, 88 in the entire high school. But it was a good education. It was a very solid education. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that I had that opportunity, in public education in Iowa at that time.
So I feel very much the same way. I was raised for about 10 years in California, where I went to kindergarten through 5th grade in California. We moved back to Oklahoma, where I was born, to be around my father's mother as she was aging, and was enrolled at Bridge Creek. And I'll never forget the 6th grade when I started there, the news media coming out and doing a story over us being the poorest school in the state. And I thought, well, it didn't mean anything to me. I was in the 6th grade, but it resonated with me, right? For some reason, it stuck in my brain, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because I still went on to receive what I felt like was a great education. Played high school football, which led me to play college football, and I, knock on wood, didn't have to take any remedial classes when I got to college. Yeah. So I felt I had a very good education as well.
Wow, there's a lot that can be said that's very positive about public education, and
and to your point, my high school graduating class, I believe, was 52, so still a very small school as well. But then all three of my kids also went to public school as well, here in Heston, where we've been the entire time. So public education is incredibly important.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering is that, given now this is an N of 3. This is a very small number. Right. You really can't extrapolate anything from the three of us and generalize it to the entire population. But overall, my experience has been, and what I've heard from people that have gone to public school, is that they've largely had very good educations. It's only since moving to the East Coast, in fact, that I've really heard much about private schooling and parochial schooling and such. I find myself puzzling as to why there is such a push at the federal level and even at many states for private education through voucher systems and other things. I'm hoping, Stephen, that's something you can help me understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I would be more than happy to. So, as you mentioned earlier, I've been in the legislature. I was elected in 2018, so I served 6 years in the House and now 1 year in the Senate. So I've been in Topeka 7 years and have been part of this conversation around education funding, and then educational outcomes, and how all of those kind of correlate to one another. Kansas, and I can only speak to Kansas predominantly. Um, you know, Kansas has always had a Supreme Court that is involved in school funding discussion. Most state Supreme Courts would not get involved in that conversation because the Constitution is very clear in our state as well as others that the appropriation obligation, right, the obligation to appropriate state funds lies with the legislature. Our Supreme Court, though, has gotten very involved in that. And when I came in 2018, they were just wrapping up what we called the Gannon decision in the Supreme Court, which required a certain level of funding and certain level of funding increases to the K-12 education system every year going forward. And so to your question, helping you understand this, well, there's been quite an inverse relationship between the amount of funding that has been put into public education and the outcomes. And when I say outcomes, I'm talking specifically about the proficiency tests, the standardized tests, and those that are proficient. And so let me give you a statistic. And I only have these statistics in front of me because I studied up because I had a meeting with the Newton School Board, USD 373, Monday night and presented in front of them. And this was a topic of conversation, as you would imagine. For perspective, in 2015, the per pupil spending for a USD 373 student was roughly 14,000 per pupil. Okay, so we're talking 10 years ago. Fast forward to today, and that's right at 25,000. So we're coming, really close to almost doubling it in that time period. However, when I look at math proficiency in 2015, and proficient means you score, I believe it's a 3 or a 4 on the standardized test. It says that you're proficient, you're college or career ready in math. Proficient in 2015 was 26% in math, but by 2024 was down to 14% proficient. Same thing in English, in language arts. 2015 was 38% proficient, down to 23% proficient. And on top of that, standardized test, the grading scale for standardized tests in Kansas was changed this year, State Board of Education, to where it appears that there was a significant increase in proficiency in every school. I would argue that while there may be some, most of it was related to the changes grading scale. So we have seen a tremendous amount of resources be pushed into the K-12 space with outcomes actually going the other direction. And so it opens the door wide open for the legislature to say, well, hold on a second. We know that by throwing money at the problem, we're not fixing it, right? And people aren't better prepared. Kids aren't better prepared. We've got to look at other options to make sure that each child has the opportunity to be prepared in their own way. And I think that's where the door is opened up significantly for the conversation around school choice, especially since I believe 10 states just in the past 2 or 3 years have gone completely to a school choice model.
And what kind of time frame did that cover again from 2020?
It was roughly 10 years, 2015
roughly 10 years.
to 2025.
Yeah, that is quite a significant increase in that time.
I think, I've heard this. In fact, I haven't heard you talk about it specifically yet, but I've heard some of what you're talking about as being real concerns, and that concerns me as well. Um, you know, when I was working in higher education, one of the things that we always had to answer was not only where is the money going, but what is the impact of the dollars that we're putting in, right? I mean, that just
Hmm.
makes good business sense. And
Sure.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but I do have questions about what are the needs that our public schools have. Do they have deferred maintenance? Do they have areas that are critical to put funding into that may not impact directly educational scores? Um, you know, is that part of where some of the funding may have been directed or redirected? Um, but I do have concern if our students' aptitude is not on par with everybody else.
Mhm.
But where
Yeah.
do you have a sense of how those funds might have been directed or misdirected?
Yeah, to some extent, I would say that you're correct. Now, in Kansas, right, when we want to build our new school or do a big infrastructure project, that's done through a bond issue, which is a
Okay. Yeah.
completely separate property tax, just like here in Heston, right? We
Yeah.
passed a bond issue, I believe it was last year or the year before, 31 million, built an entirely new middle school onto the high school, a number of other things. So the bulk of that infrastructure is paid for through that method. So while I'm certainly sure, and we all acknowledge that inflation has been really, really crazy the last
Yeah.
few years, especially during COVID, the increase in education funding still far, far outpaces the rate of inflation. So while there
Mhm.
are some other costs, we have seen, for example, administration costs that have increased in excess of 35%, whereas, increases to teacher pay have only increased 10%. So there are some definite disparities in the amount of money received versus kind of where it is being spent.
Mhm.
Reserves, for example, Kansas overall, last count, school systems across the state were setting over $2.1 billion in reserve funds. Now, that's a lot of money, first of all. Um, and when you ask a school district about the reserve funds, they actually go back to what they say was the Brownback period, right? Where school funding was flat in a number of years at a minimum, and with some of the budgeting games that were played, I remember, and this is true, there was a period of time where schools were facing not having enough funds to actually pay their employees, even though they knew they were coming.
Hmm.
And so it led to this fear of, well, what if the state doesn't fund us? We've got to build up these cash reserves. And so any school district I've ever asked about those reserves has brought that up. Now, is that a reason to have reserves on that level, or is it not? That's up for conversation and debate.
Mhm.
But yeah.
I think your comment about the disparity is interesting, and
Hmm.
and I think also Lamar's thinking about what other things is this funding going for. I know
Mm-hmm.
that what we see here in Maryland is that we have schools that have been built long, long time ago, and this failing infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's money that's needed for that. We also hear about that same disparity in pay between administration and teachers, and that's one that bothers me quite a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because some of the administrators for these schools make an outrageous amount of money, and yet the uh, the expectation seems to be that because we're paying those individuals that amount of money, they should be making a difference. Well, maybe it really makes a difference what we pay the teachers,
Mm-hmm.
more than the administrators. I mean, they're the ones that have the direct contact with the kids, right? So,
I think that
interesting
there's
points here.
certainly some validity to that conversation. I would take it a step further though and say, how do we incentivize the teachers
Mhm.
to to And when I talk about incentivize, I'm thinking financially, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most anybody in the corporate world is incentivized by a bonus or some type of a resource that would come their way. We don't have a structure like that in the K through 12 system.
Right.
And so that would be an interesting conversation. Another one in the administrative space is Kansas is unique in that we have, if I remember correctly, right around 290 school districts in the state of Kansas, educating roughly 500 or 600,000 students.
Hmm.
Does that make sense when you can look at some other states like Florida, when I check that have 72 school districts educating about 3 million students,
Mm-hmm.
right? So is there an administrative imbalance there? Are there things that could be done there? Whole different conversation than school choice. But what I'm saying is all of these things, when we look at the significant amount of increase in per pupil spending, and those dramatic increases of recent, um, and then seeing, like I said, that inverse relationship with outcomes. And Lamar, you mentioned higher education, the number of remedial courses
Mm-hmm.
that kids are having to receive in higher education before they're prepared to go into their true college level courses is quite staggering in the state of Kansas.
Hmm.
So a couple of things have been kind of bouncing around in my head as you were talking, Stephen. One was, my last hitch, my last career was in human resources, and I can't tell you how many people who were teachers, primarily teachers, or classroom aides, or something on that line, were looking for jobs, looking for a second job.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly many were looking to just switch because of the pay disparity. I think we need to put that at kind of the top of our conversation list. That's a big issue.
I
Um,
think it is too. I think it is too,
yeah,
but it's important to acknowledge, though, that that is a decision made by the local school board.
it is. Yes.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of leads me though to our if we're looking at providing in incentives, not the right word for me, but finding ways for people to uh, to get funding to go to private school because people maybe need choices, or they want a better education than the public school is providing, etc. Is that, from the state's perspective, is that helping our situation, or is it not helping our public school situation? Where should we? My thought is, I feel like we should be putting resources in to fix where the problems are, identify the problems, and put the resources in to the public education to make those changes that are needed to change the outcomes that we're looking for. Can we do that? Are there ways
Well,
to do that?
so that's a great question. And going back to the chart that I shared, you got to
Yeah.
remember that from the state legislative perspective, our primary role is appropriation. We're
Mm-hmm.
appropriators. It is then on the local school board how they choose to spend the bulk of their money. Now, there are certainly some silos and some requirements with certain pieces of funding, but the vast majority of funding that is a local led decision, because the way our constitution was written, creation of school boards and things like that. So if we have went in 10 years from a 14,000 a year to a $26,000 a year, $25,000 a year per pupil spend, and local school boards aren't allocating it right to fix some of the problems that you mentioned, it creates quite a conflict because, of course, no government likes to be micromanaged by the government above them. I don't like the federal government telling me what to do as a state. School boards really don't like it when the state government tells them how to manage. And so it raises quite a question, right, of to what extent do we force those changes down on a lower level, or do we just look at changing the system altogether? Because over 10 years, it's become somewhat evident that it's not going to just fix itself with more money.
Mm-hmm. So Lamar's probably shared with you, Stephen, in one of your coffees that I'm not a I'm not a big fan of private education at the elementary and high school level. And I know that for many states they really see this as a possible solution to the testing issues and readiness for young people to go to college. But I've got some issues with
Mm-hmm.
private education. And I'll just kind of throw three on the table. And if you want to pick up any of those and talk with me about those, that's fine. One is that, and we're somewhat addressing that right now, that when states and the federal government move towards like a voucher system or to some kind of support of private schools, it tends to take away funding from public schools, and in particular, it hurts rural communities. The second thing is that from a I, in some parts of the world, this is a dirty word, equity. So, but there's an equity issue here, that people who maybe don't really need the support and the effort to go to a private school, they are able to access tax breaks, and it does tend to create this a greater difference between the haves and the have-nots. The third thing, and I don't see an easy way for the government around this, is that I think it fundamentally violates the principle of separation of church and state. In Kansas, for example, there are between 230 and 235, I think it is, private schools. 80% of those, roughly 185, are religiously affiliated. And so, even though I'm in a faith tradition that is big on schools, I have a real hard time with that because I in my lifetime, I have never seen an alliance between faith communities and government that hasn't ultimately hurt the faith communities. And so there's that perspective, that there it kind of breaks down that wall of separation, and the loser tends to be the faith communities. But then there's also this sense of it is preferring faith communities over other and certain faiths. For example, in Kansas, the majority of those religiously affiliated schools are Catholic. Now that may be Baptist in another state, or it may be Mennonite or Quaker in other states, or it might be Seventh-day Adventist in other states, but it does tend to prefer one faith over another. And I have real problems with that. So those are my objections, and why I am just categorically not a supporter of vouchers and not a supporter of private schools. At the college level, sure. I mean, I went to 3 private religiously affiliated schools, and I finally finished paying off all my student loans at age 65. And so,
boy,
yeah.
Thankfully it didn't take me that long, but it took me a long time.
Yeah, well, it took me from age 18 to 65. Let me tell you, and now they're talking about 50-year mortgages. I don't think so.
That's crazy.
That was a 50-year mortgage. So anyway, that's where I'm at on this, and I do live and work among folks that are big fans of private schools, and I try to be very respectful of that. I just don't like that pushed onto me and my tax dollars.
Lamar here. I know that this podcast is going a little long today, but hang in there with us. It's going to be worth it. If you need to take a break, go ahead. And while on the break, be sure to take a moment and hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe. Share this podcast with somebody, and even send us a comment. You can send me an email at lamarthirdspace@gmail.com. Now remember, that's Lamar, the number 3, RD. Now back to the podcast.
So this podcast, we've got about 5 hours left, right, to dive into.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Sure.
So, no, it's You raised certainly some valid points, and a couple of them I would certainly love to dig a little bit deeper into. First of all, it's this concept of the separation of church and state, which I think is one of the most misconstrued ideas that exists, because there is no separation of church and state in our Constitution. That is actually something that has come up primarily because of Jefferson's letter that he wrote, and some people infer that it is in the First Amendment of the Constitution when it's absolutely not. First Amendment of the Constitution dives specifically into that Congress shall not make no, I have it written here, Congress shall make no law establishing the religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So when we look at faith and its foundation in our country, faith permeates the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all of those things. So the separation of church and state as a factual piece of information really doesn't exist in the way that I think that it's being interpreted.
Au contraire.
Yes, tell me, Tom.
Is this a degrees disagreement time in our?
That's right. I love it.
So in the portion of the Constitution that you just read, mm-hmm. folks that are really supportive of private schools like to quote the second part of that phrase, shall not prohibit. But what's the first part? I don't have it in front of me right here. Can you
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
And see, I would contend it is in the Constitution, because when you are preferring, putting out financial incentives and doing that kind of thing, you're actually preferring a religion. And so I do see it in the Constitution, and I'm familiar with the mm-hmm. What you say about Jefferson. So, okay, so we're at a draw.
No, that's an interesting thought, though, because when I read that, the establishment of mm-hmm. a religion, first of all, by creating a voucher system that allows somebody to go to a Catholic school, a Baptist school, or a non-denominational school, or a school that's not affiliated with any religion, the government is not forcing you to go to a religion. They're not forcing the establishment of a religion. They are simply saying, if that is an option you want to choose, you have that right. But you could choose this school over here that's not religiously affiliated, equally with those same voucher dollars. My perspective.
But the word forcing is not in the Constitution. Nobody's being forced.
Right. Establishing, though.
Establishing.
And that's where I'm getting. And I don't see establishment there either.
I think I do.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's all right. I like that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's okay. Yeah. That was, and I suspected that's how you were going to respond to that. And I think that, I have heard that before. And frequently when people are having these conversations on, the talking heads on TV, which we are not talking heads, I just want to say, but because as Lamar liked to say, we don't know diddly squat, but we have opinions. So
that's right, and we keep learning and learning and learning.
That's right. And learning and learning, and so I appreciate that response, and I appreciate the opportunity just to. It's useful to me to kind of try to see that through your lens, mm-hmm. through your eyes.
Yeah, no, and I feel the same way, because really it comes down to just the way that you read it and the way that you interpret it, right? I mean, that's why there's thousands of different religions, because the Bible is read and interpreted so many different ways.
And fortunately, mine is the correct way.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Exactly.
So let me throw a 5-cent response in. I guess one of the things that concerns me, just about the conversation you both are having, not the topic, and that is it is so easy for any of these processes that we're putting into play and are into play. It's easy for us, or for people, to take those and run with them to the point of actually harming other people. And one of those areas is discriminating. And right now, like you said, Stephen, in Kansas, the private school tax, I'm not sure the right term I want to use, but really it's looking for lower income support, supporting lower
Right.
income folks, right? But that's not necessarily the case in all states. And so I do have some concern about discrimination based off, off of economics
Mhm.
and social class, et cetera. And as you know, that's also can be tied into other types of discrimination as well. I would be concerned about discriminating those who may have disabilities as well, because not every private school is able to provide those kinds of
Hmm.
services
Hmm.
to students who have certain kinds of disabilities, whether it's learning disabilities or physical disabilities. So that's a concern of mine. Are my tax dollars going to support those kinds of situations? Yeah. There's another piece of this, though, that has me in a bit of a personal quandary. And the personal quandary is I do believe I think competition is a good thing in a lot of ways. And you were talking, Stephen, about, well, you can't keep throwing money at something. I'm paraphrasing, but can't keep
Sure.
throwing money at something and expect it to get better. Well, we know that. But competition can um, force people to look at how to develop better and more effective and ways of teaching and doing the education business, and looking at outcomes. Um, you know, so maybe there is an upside to having a choice in educational opportunities that say, listen, the better, more effective educational process, maybe that's the way to go. I don't know. What do you guys think?
So let me throw maybe a scenario out and get your
Okay.
guys' thought, because both of you touched on what I would say is the equity issue, right?
Mhm.
Um, right now in Kansas, if a family is a family of means and can afford a private education and choose to send their child there, they can do that. But if you have someone, and let's say it's a lower income, underprivileged child in an inner city school who is not successful where they are at for a whole host of whatever reasons, is the same not true that it's unfair that they would be forced to go to a school system that isn't right for them simply because they can't afford to go to a private school? And shouldn't the state then balance that equity out? I'd love to have your thoughts there.
Well, I guess uh, maybe you need to explain this a little bit further. It was something we were thinking about or talking about, suggesting forcing students to go to a public school. Where do you see that
Well,
coming into play?
right now, right, for most children, especially those that are underprivileged or lower income, wherever they live, they're assigned to go to a public school. That is their
Right,
only
right.
option, right? But what if they're not successful there? What if their parents, for a host of reasons, feel that their child cannot be successful at that school? What other options do they have? And is it not creating an equity issue in and of itself that because you are of means, you could afford to go to another school because your family can afford it. But if you're not of financial means, you're stuck at that one school and you have no other option. It's just thinking about it kind of inverse, right? And I
Hmm.
can see both of your guys' wheels are kind of thinking like, okay, because that's also kind of how I look at this too. And while there are some programs that are very limited in Kansas, we haven't really leaned into it. There's a pool of money that is available, but it really raises that equity question, because I think Tom mentioned equity from if the wealthy people are now going to get additional tax credits, maybe for what they're already paying for a private school, and that's not fair. I looked at it, at least on this topic, from that. that underserved, underprivileged child that
Yeah.
that has no options because they simply don't have them.
Mhm. Well, yeah. I mean, I think you make a compelling argument there, Stephen, because you know it's like we know that sometimes people are trapped in their circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't, and they feel like there's no way out. There's no way to get up. Now, I would say that the last thing I ever expected to do in my life was go to college. In fact, I am the only person in my immediate family that went to college, and most, at least in the current generation, there are very, very few within my family that ever had that opportunity to go to college. So I hear what you're saying, and what that illustrates to me is how difficult the whole issue around fairness, because equity
Mhm.
tends to set people off, right? So, but
Right.
it's really, it's about fairness is
Yeah.
what equity is about, and but the whole issue of fairness is really, really difficult
Mm-hmm.
to balance, and I know that beginning, and I think it's in 2027, there is going to be a new federal voucher program come into play that's going to have some pretty dramatic impact on states, and actually, in some cases, it argues that it may really be very costly to states for this voucher program. So we're not going to be done resolving this for quite a while yet. And now that the feds are getting involved, um, we aren't really sure how that. Do y'all have any projections about how that's going to play out for Kansas once the Fed program starts up?
No, I'll be 100% honest. The only thing that I recall of the federal program was an executive order that the president signed, which, to be clear, I am not a fan of governing by executive order. I think it circumvents the legislative process. And as a legislator, I'm not a fan of executive orders. However, that's all that I recall. I don't recall there being an actual program established, a funding mechanism created, um, that we're to expect. As a matter of fact, I know in 2027, our state legislature has to adopt an entirely new school funding formula, as required by law. Every 10 years, we have to reevaluate it. So
Hmm.
I haven't heard anything about that topic quite yet on a
Mm.
state level. So I'm really curious, and I wrote it down so that I can dig into it and look it up.
Yeah. So it has to do with national legislation that passed in 2025 that enables states like Kansas to participate in broader federal voucher program, but states have to opt in, and apparently there's been a few states that have opted in, and some that have said they're not going to opt in at all. Um, Although it seems really incredibly not defined from what I can tell. But it just appears like there's a train rumbling down the track. We don't know if it's a
Yeah.
steam locomotive or an electric train, but something appears that it may be coming out of the federal.
Okay. So I just again, Chat GPT is such a great research tool on such a short notice, right?
Yeah,
I'm a fan.
I
Um,
use Perplexity, by the way, but
Perplexity. Okay.
yeah.
I'm still learning this whole AI thing, and really, this is what I use it for: is quick research on the spot. But it sounds like, included in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the budget,
Yes, yes.
there's a new. This is saying there's a new federal tax credit scholarship program where individual taxpayers could get a credit for donations to scholarship granting organizations that in turn fund private school tuition, homeschool tutoring, and stuff like that.
Yes,
So
that's what I was reading about. Yeah.
okay, so I'll have to look into that because again, when you pack policy into a budget process, right? I would argue that it doesn't get fully vetted, and that you don't have all of the question marks answered, that we should have answered on how that's going to play out. But yeah, it looks like it's set to begin January of 2027 in participating states. So thanks for bringing that to my attention. I have another research project.
Yes. All right. Okay.
But, I think as I'm kind of reflecting on our conversations, I can say for myself, I'm not settled. I'm not totally settled one way or the other, to be honest with you. I do have concerns on
Mm-hmm.
funding private schools, some of which, we brought up here. But I also have real concerns about public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe funding private schools will fix the problem that we have in our public schools.
Yeah.
And so I think I would like first, maybe that's a whole nother conversation sometime to have with some folks, but I think that's a concern we ought to address however we can. But that's kind of the conflict I have going on with me.
Mm-hmm.
I see both as challenges that need some addressing. I'm concerned that where's the accountability in the private school sector? Where's the accountability in the public school sector? I mean, all of that we should be discussing and talking about. But that's kind of where I'm at. And I know that sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but honestly, that's kind of how I feel today.
No,
Yeah,
and I totally get that, and I also want to go back and touch on two other points that were mentioned, and I'm glad I grabbed
yeah.
my pen, and that is
Go
the
ahead.
effect on rural Kansas,
Oh
right,
yeah,
with school
Yeah.
choice, and the effect on special education students and sped funding and that issue. So I think first of all on the rural issue, you raise a very valid point. I know a number of schools in rural areas, and I'll just say one in my district that it is, I would say, arguably the only reason that the town exists. Almost, it's the primary employer, um, and it is kind of the center of the community. However, in the same sentence, I would say when we're talking about proficiency and outcomes, that school graduated 0% of their students college and career ready according to state assessments.
Hmm.
So the bigger question is, do we support public schools because they're so important to their community, or are we looking at it from what's best for the child, what's
Hmm.
best for the kid, what prepares them best for their future? And that is a quandary. Rural Kansas to me is so incredibly important, and our rural communities are shrinking more and more every day. How we change that I don't know, but I also struggle with more and more money to keep some of these very small, very rural, very arguably poor performing schools afloat when it's not what I would say represents what is best for the child.
Mhm.
And how do we address that? And is a voucher system, or is it not, um, better for the child or not? So I would say, Tom, again, I agree with that rural issue because there would be ramifications in some of these smaller towns. There's no question.
And as you point out, some of those ramifications actually could be better for the students,
Mm-hmm. Could we?
and some could be worse. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody hated consolidation when it happened in Iowa, but it probably made for a better education for a number of students.
And I'm not saying that that's the right answer,
Yeah.
right? I
No.
think
Oh,
that
no. No. No.
that is certainly, as we look at the fact that 55% of our state general fund goes to K-12 education. 55% of every tax dollar we pay in Kansas goes to K-12. Roughly 55% of every property tax dollar that you pay on your home in Kansas goes to K-12 education.
Hmm.
Those numbers continue to increase year after year, yet the inverse on outcomes happens. So something's got to give is what I'm getting at, right? In a big way. And that's why I remain very open to the school choice conversation. I want to see it. I want to understand it. I want to understand all the implications before I would ever say that I'm fully on board with a piece of legislation that creates it. But that for those reasons and a number of others, I remain very open to this conversation because I realize the facts are the facts,
Mhm.
and I think we've got to look at something different. Um, if I can, I'll go on to special education funding because that's a huge deal.
Sure.
Believe it or not, I was the only state senator on Senate Ways and Means that advocated for increased special ed funding to our K-12 education system. And I'm proud to have done that because the percentage increase in what are called those special education students, and there's a more politically correct term I'm probably missing at this point, but the reality is there are far more of them today than there were 10 years ago. We can get into why that is, right? I think there are varying differing opinions on why. Some of it's just that we diagnose it better. Some of it is we're saving children that are born at 22 weeks that are creating, learning challenges later on. Some would say that it's the things we're feeding our kids or social media. Whatever the reason, there is no question that there is a significantly larger percentage of student with needs in our public education system. And so one of the big questions when we look at a voucher type program is what happens to those students? And how do we balance that out, the state's obligation to educate a child no matter their learning needs or disabilities,
Mhm.
with doing what is right for each kid individually? That's a very challenging topic, but it's one that SPED has historically been underfunded in Kansas. The federal government isn't fully funding Kansas special education. Therefore, the state can't fully fund special education. And so some of those resources, to your point earlier, Lamar, where you've seen that increase, some of that increase is being diverted to special
Mm-hmm.
education because it
Sure.
just has to.
Mhm.
So again, another one that I don't know that there's a clear cut answer to, but something that as this conversation happens, and I don't think it'll happen this next session. I firmly believe that it will happen in the 2027 session. Especially if we get a Republican governor, I think it's going to be a big topic of conversation in the 2027 session because the data suggests that we have to have that conversation.
Well, it's really obvious, Steve. First of all, appreciate so much your insight that you bring to this conversation. And then also, I know Tom and I we're not necessarily always on the same page, but we have some agreements and some disagreements over this too.
Mm-hmm.
But, we got to keep these conversations going. We have to become better educated. We got some decisions
Absolutely.
coming up in the future, right?
Yeah.
In
Yes, we
2027,
do.
it sounds like it. So, educating ourselves as much as we can on this, I think, is an important thing to do.
Yeah, I
I,
totally agree.
I'm going to transition us, though, from this topic. And we get kind of two things to transition to. One, we want to talk a little bit about kindness. And the second thing, we want to do a little bit of a review of how we did.
Yeah.
But let's talk about kindness, first of all. Tom and I had the privilege of a couple of times talking with, some guests from the UK, and one particular person spent some time, has got, a lot invested in a website, an interactive website about kindness. And it has impacted me personally to be thinking about this. How do I impact others? How do I show kindness? Am I showing kindness? Those kinds of things. One of the questions that we've been asking guests of late has been, can you think of a time when someone has demonstrated kindness to you that has impacted your life significantly? And second part of that question is, can you think of a time, not necessarily having to put names out there, but times where maybe you have reached out in a kind way that has impacted others?
Absolutely. And I love that you guys do this. You can ask any one of my kids at our dinner table each night back when they were all at home having dinner with us. We would always ask the question, what did you do nice for somebody today?
Mm.
And every single person would have to go around the table and answer that question. And even if they didn't know, we could usually ask them enough probing questions where they recognize, hey, no, I did do something nice for somebody. I just didn't realize it because it was, second nature to do it. So I love that you're asking this question. Let me tell you about a kindness that happened to me 2 years ago that still sticks out in my mind. So I'm a property owner. I've invested in properties over the years, and we own a building on 7th and Main Street in Newton. And during the election season a couple of years ago, I get a phone call from a Harvey County Sheriff's officer who happened to be passing by my building during, I think it was Winter Storm Uri, if I remember correctly, who saw a massive cascade of water coming down in front of my window in my building. Mm. And it turned out the fire sprinkler system had frozen and just shattered and was flooding the building. Of course, I know I'm like panicking at this point and call the emergency number, get the city to shut off the water. I call my good friend and I call my wife and I'm like, here's what we're up against. I'm on my way home. I'm 2 hours away, but I'll get there as soon as I can get there. I didn't make it halfway home before I got a call from my friends who got together all of our other friends. Wow. Who had that entire mess cleaned up before I could even get there.
Wow.
That's the type of community support that allows me to feel good about going to Topeka and living there, 5 days a week during the session, is knowing that I have people watching out for me back home. And that kindness has resonated with me on so many levels because nobody had to do that. It was 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, yet many of my friends and community members came together to solve that dilemma. And we're on it so quick and so fast, we didn't even have to file an insurance claim. It was quite remarkable.
It is.
Wow.
So what about you guys? But before we go into the next one, tell me about an act of kindness to each one of you guys that has happened. I'd love to hear your stories too.
I'm not a very kind person.
Oh, I don't buy that, Tom. Don't buy it at all.
So the other day, or about last week when it was recycling day, we live on the east side of the Catoctin Mountains in Maryland, and the wind comes over the mountains pretty intensely at times. And we had everybody put their recycling out. Now, of course, that's boxes and all kinds of stuff, right? and bins. And we no more than got them out there, and the National Weather Service put out a high wind warning. So I quickly,
I know this story.
I notified as many of my neighbors as I could. Hey, you better pull your stuff back into the garage. We got a high wind warning for the next 8 hours. It's going to be a mess. Well, some people did, some people didn't, and there was like stuff all over the neighborhood. And in most cases, people, they'll look out the next morning and they'll see their stuff blown around. They'll go and they'll pick it up, but not everybody did. Maybe not everybody is able to. So 2 days ago, I grabbed a big bag and a box cutter, and I set off around the neighborhood, and I started picking up every piece of recycling and trash that I could find. And I really collected quite a bit. And it's a little thing, but it makes the neighborhood look a little bit better, and it just helps people that otherwise might not have noticed or been able to get out and do anything about it.
That's awesome.
Very good.
And it didn't kill me; it just gave me exercise.
Right. Absolutely, totally.
And why those trash cans have wheels on them? They're great for rolling them out, but when the wind takes them, it just makes it harder to go down the street further. It's great.
So incredibly true.
I think about this often. This happened to my wife and I when we were just after we got married. And we got married pretty young in life. We got married when we were 18.
I was 19.
Okay, all right. And it can work in the right situations, right?
Absolutely.
But there was very little income coming in the household. And I remember I was at some sort of meeting, and this gentleman came up to me and had a folded up $100 bill. And he says, I'm going to give you this $100 bill. You can use it for yourself if you need to, you and your wife. You don't have to. Or you could, if someone else needs it, you could find a spot for them. And this is one of those life lesson things of kindness. And he said, I really don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I put that in my billfold, and I kept that in my billfold for a couple of years. Always knowing it was there and thinking, okay, I could use it here, but I really don't need to. And found ways to kind of move through that. And then my wife and I were on we were out in another state. Actually, Tom, it was in Wisconsin when you were living in Wisconsin. We were in a snowstorm, and we ended up at someone's house overnight, and they were heating their house with a wood stove in the kitchen, and that was it. And utilities were very, very little utilities were on because they were on the last leg for utilities. And it was like, we got in the car, we drove about a mile down the road, and I said, I think this is the right spot. We turned around, went back, and I gave him the $100 bill. And I thought, that was kind of a pass-through act of kindness. Someone was kind enough to give it to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whatever happened with that person and the dollar bill, the $100 bill. But that was a lesson I will never, ever forget in kindness.
I love that.
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice.
Well, let's take an opportunity to wrap this up by saying, how did we do creating a third space? What do you think?
I think that we did pretty great. I think that we found some disagreements, right, where we may have not seen eye to eye on certain topics. However, things that Tom said to me had me giving me thought-provoking things. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing happened the other way around, where maybe we heard a perspective where it was like, I'll have to give that one a little more consideration.
Yeah.
So I really loved that. I really enjoyed that.
I did too. And thank you, Stephen, for letting me quiz you a little bit on that. And thank you for pushing us as well, pushing me. I think where I come out on this is that I think it's safe to say that Stephen, you and I are probably of two fundamentally different positions on this. Mm-hmm. And Lamar made the observation, that neither position is going to solve the other.
That's true.
And so what that is saying to me is that we can talk about this till we are blue in the face in the direction that we're going. But the reality is, as with so many issues like this, there needs to be a creative third way that is identified. Mm-hmm. Something that allows us to simply improve the education system in our states and in the U.S. for our kids. And like Lamar said, funding private schools isn't going to do it. Like you've said, Stephen, just dumping more money into public schools isn't going to do it. We've got to find another way. And I think that's what has emerged in this conversation for me, is that neither position is absolutely correct, but that if we bring these together and use them to try to find that third way, that's the ideal.
Well said, Tom. I think just one last piece to add on for me was that I didn't feel a need to get defensive. It allowed me to get into my head a little bit more and think, well, maybe both have some valid points, and being able to come to that at least initial thought. And I think by creating a space where we respect each other, we're listening to each other, and we're careful, and we're challenging each other, that it does allow for us to think more broadly rather than to pull in and dig in. So, hey, I think you guys, I think we did an admirable job, and I hope that this is a good example for others.
Yeah.
So.
I agree, and I'm going to nominate you guys to manage the education committee and moderate the open dialogue between the state and the education department in helping find where that solution lies.
Oh my God.
Tom,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think you do great.
It's-
Lamar, you do fantastic as well.
I-
I love
we
it.
do good.
I've taken on one too many jobs in retirement, Stephen. I don't think I should take on anymore.
Fair point. I
Oh,
know that.
But
I'm not in retirement, but I understand
yeah,
taking on an awful lot of jobs.
yeah. Well,
but
Stephen,
this has been great.
yeah, it has. It's been a lot of fun. And Stephen, thank you for being such a good sport to do this table talk with us. I hope we can get you back here sometime. We wanted to do this now, and
Yeah.
and just so people understand, we're actually recording this in November.
Yeah.
And we are, and next week, Lamar and I are going to cut a new show for Thanksgiving that does nothing but talk about the acts of kindness that people have shared with us,
Love that.
and the that we've received on the online survey that we've been doing. It's been pretty cool. So we're going to do that for our Thanksgiving show, and this is going to air after the first of the year, but we wanted to record it now because we know after the first of the year, getting even 2 minutes of your time is going to be a bit challenging.
Definitely gets challenging. I mean, 4 a.m. is always open.
Yeah, right.
Well, maybe for you.
That's right. Exactly.
but thank you so much. You've been a great sport, and good luck. Thank you for all the good work you do in the Kansas legislature. And just wish you the very best of success in this next session coming up.
Very good. Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Lamar. I always enjoy the conversations. I've never walked away from a conversation with either one of you and said, well, that was a waste of time. Never have I done that. I always go away with a smile on my face, grateful for the conversation and having learned something. So thank you for inviting me. And I'll look forward to the next time that we either have coffee or we're on a recorded conversation.
All right.
Great.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you guys very much.
I really enjoy talking to Stephen.
We may not agree with everything, but
No.
we sure enjoy having the conversations, don't we?
Yeah, we do. We do. I mean, I learned some good things from him, and as I shared, earlier, I come away from this conversation feeling like the way we're going about this right now is not going to solve it.
Okay.
I think there is a third way that we have to try to figure out.
I thought that was really good that you pointed that out here towards the end of the conversation. He used the term throwing money at public education is not going to fix public education. Right. And I totally agree with him. In fact, I don't think throwing money at anything without some sort of a strategy and without some sort of accountability and assessment is going to do anything. Yeah. Because we just tried and true that it doesn't help anything in that way. But I don't think doing the same thing with private education makes a difference either. Yeah. So you're right. We need to find a third way to elevate the impact of resources, the impact of personnel, and pedagogy, and the outcomes. Yeah. What are we looking for from education? And he kind of touched on that question when he was talking about the small town and kind of the culture. I think that would be something we ought to explore again a little further, is what does education do for the community versus what does it do only for the individual? That's right. So, it's when he said that, I thought of my hometown of Morning Sun. Mm-hmm. Because back in 1993, when they closed the school, students had their choice of going to one of four schools. They could go to Winfield Mount Union, they could go to Mediapolis, or they could go to Wapello. And my guess is that by that time, moving them into those schools probably gave them a little bit more solid education. But it was heartbreaking for the community because they felt like they lost part of their identity. But then at somewhere along the line, they realized their identity was not in the school per se, it was in the wrestling program. And so they retained the wrestling program. They found a way to do that. And part of it is that they have this youth wrestling program now that
32 years later is still in existence, and it's still the Morning Sun Tigers, and it's their Morning Sun Tigers youth wrestling program, and wrestling still is at the heart of the community. And so, I give them kudos for that.
Sure.
They found what was important for them in the school. It's too bad that it was all about sports at one level, but at the same time, it really gave the community identity. And I know that because I grew up in that environment. And that was a school that was known for the wrestling teams statewide and nationally. And so I understand why they wanted to hold on to that, but they could hold on to that identity and let the kids go on to get hopefully better education.
I think the other challenge that he identified or that we identified was accountability. What's the expectation, and who are school systems accountable to? I see a much less accountability on the private school side, much less, and that's a concern for me. But yet, even on the public education side, funding and allocation of funds, expectations, outcomes, programming. I know it's a complex problem, but you pointed out very well that we're paying high dollars for leaders to tackle those problems, right?
Right.
And to develop responses and to come up with alternatives or come up with a pathway through that. And so I think that accountability piece needs to be revisited. I do agree with him. I don't think it'll go well if there is just a heavy top-down approach. But I'm talking about like state and federal government approach. But I do think there has to be some accountability to those dollars that come from the state and come from the feds, as well as what comes locally. I mean, here in Heston, for example, it's just almost 50%, not quite, but almost 50% of our city taxes go to our school system.
Right.
That's a lot of dollars.
But I'd like to suggest though that just we are able to put some metrics into play to determine how much bang are we getting for the education dollar, right?
Yeah.
And the reason we can do that is because public schools are nonprofit entities and public entities whose budgets are open to scrutiny. There has to be transparency in that.
Okay.
Among the private religious schools, did you know that they don't have to file Form 990? Because they can identify themselves with the IRS as a religious organization. And that means, and the Form 990, for those that aren't familiar with it, this is a form that every nonprofit that files. And you can go to websites that are free websites, and you can type in the name and you can of the organization, and you can look at their Form 990, which gives you a very detailed view of their finances. Well, and many private elementary and high schools that are religiously affiliated, they just say to the IRS, we're a religious organization, and they're exempt from filing the Form 990. I got serious problems with that in terms of transparency. And if we had that information, what we may find is we can apply the same metric.
Yeah.
And would we actually then find that they're not doing any better? Or are they really doing better?
Well, I think what you're pointing out is something we didn't really go down that road very far.
No.
Because we just ran out of time. But I think transparency is really important. And I think, accountability is really important. And if we're going to be giving our tax dollars in whatever form the state or the federal government is choosing to use, I think that it behooves us to keep having this conversation that we were having today, and to request or to make very clear that if this is going to go down this road of providing these dollars, there needs to be some checks and balances in place. It can't just be, as Stephen had mentioned, we just can't throw money at it and expect it to be a better deal.
Yep. Completely agree with Steve on that point.
Yep. Okay. It was fun. I was pleased with the process that we used. Mm-hmm. And, Stephen, who's right, he says, we got 6 hours to do this podcast, because the topic is so huge. But this is just an example of how we can start having the conversation. And I encourage our listeners to think in those terms and to find ways to have conversations like this.
Yep, that's right.
So anyway,
well
done, Tom.
I just want to say, Lamar, that I really appreciate the fact that you used the word behooves recently.
I really worked at that. Yeah, I got it in there.
we just don't hear behooves enough. I mean, yeah, it behooves me to say we need to hear more of behooves.
I almost used the word opine, but I couldn't get it right in the right spot.
All right, we'll have to work on that. That'll give us something to shoot for in the next podcast.
And it'll give us some people to take time and look that up and see what it means.
Yep. Oh, and by the way, Lamar.
Yes.
Welcome to season 4.
All right, here we are. We're kicking this baby off.
We are.
Who thought we would make 4 seasons of this podcast? I love it. Thank you to all of our listeners, by the way. Thank you to those guests who are coming on. We're having a ball. I'm let us know what your thoughts are. I trust that you're getting out of this at least some of what we're feeling by putting into it.
Yeah, indeed.
It's great.
Indeed.
I enjoy it.
All right. Hey, Lamar, have a really good week coming up here.
All right.
And we'll talk to you again soon.
Stay warm out there.
I'll do that. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Tom here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to get notices about new episodes, and be sure to like and share the podcast as well. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus, and we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talked about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving forward toward third space.
This podcast was reviewed and approved by Jake and Ebby Dogs Incorporated.